At 1 o'clock on March 23, 2005, the control room at BP's Texas City Refinery showed about 8 feet of liquid inside a distillation tower. The tower was 170 feet tall, and it was almost full. No one in the control room could see that. Their instrument measured only a narrow section near the tower's bottom. Once liquid rose beyond that range, the display did not follow it upward. A second high-level alarm had failed. Operators kept feeding and heating the tower while its actual level climbed through 60 feet, then 90, then 140. At 1:04 p.m., investigators later calculated that liquid stood about 158 feet high. The display indicated less than 8. 16 minutes later, the refinery exploded. 15 workers were killed. The Chemical Safety Board counted 180 injured. The difference between 8 feet and 158 feet explains how the explosion began. It does not explain why it was allowed to happen. The Texas City complex covered roughly 1,200 acres southeast of Houston. It was BP's largest refinery anywhere in the world and could produce about 10 million gallons of gasoline a day. Inside it, the isomerization unit rearranged small hydrocarbon molecules to make higher-octane gasoline components. One section used a tall distillation tower called the raffinate splitter. During normal operation, feed entered near the middle. Heat drove lighter material upward. Heavier material left through the bottom. Instruments and valves were supposed to keep the inventory balanced. But March 23 was not normal operation. The unit was returning from a month-long maintenance shutdown. Startup is one of the most dangerous moments in a refinery. Temperatures, pressures, and flows are changing. Equipment that has been opened and repaired must work together again. BP's own guidance called for experienced assistance during this phase. Instead, the startup began with missing information. The night crew started filling the splitter, stopped, and left the next shift to resume an unusual, interrupted procedure. The steps completed overnight were not properly recorded. The tower was supposed to begin near 50% on its level display. It had already been filled beyond the top of the instrument's measuring range. Only one high-level alarm activated. The separate backup alarm never sounded. Its failure was not recognized, logged, or repaired. Other safeguards were already known to be unreliable. The level transmitter, a sight glass, and a pressure control valve all had problems before startup. The unit went ahead without fixing them. Then the day supervisor left because of a family emergency. No technically trained replacement took his place. The control room operator was also likely fatigued. He had worked 12-hour shifts for 29 consecutive days. These facts matter, but they are not invitations to select one person and call the case solved. The operators were trying to control a tower whose instruments could not show them what was happening inside it. At 9:51 that morning, feed began entering the tower again. Burners heated the circulating liquid. The level on the control screen stayed near the upper end of its tiny range. The real level moved far above it. By 11:16, the display suggested about 9 feet. Investigators calculated 67. At 11:50, the display suggested about 8. The real level was near 98. Just after 12:40, it reached roughly 140 feet. Operators saw pressure rise, but not the mass of liquid producing it. They reduced furnace heat and tried to send more heavy product out of the bottom. For a moment, the outgoing flow matched the incoming flow, but matching flows could not remove the enormous inventory already trapped inside the tower. At 1:14, liquid reached the overhead piping. Pressure spiked. 3 emergency relief valves opened. The safeguards were finally responding, but they discharged into the wrong kind of system. The relief valves sent hydrocarbon liquid toward a blowdown drum. An old vertical vessel connected to a stack open to the atmosphere. It was intended to separate liquid from vapor during a release. It was not large enough for what arrived. The Chemical Safety Board estimated that 51,900 gallons passed through the relief valves in about 6 minutes. The drum filled. The stack filled. Then flammable liquid erupted from the top like a geyser. As it fell, the volatile liquid evaporated and spread near the ground as an invisible vapor cloud. Workers nearby saw the release. Radio calls warned the control room. Operators shut off furnace fuel at 1:19 and 59 seconds. 5 seconds later, the vapor cloud ignited. Investigators considered a backfire from an idling diesel pickup, parked about 25 feet from the drum, the most likely ignition source. The truck did not create the cloud. If that engine had not ignited it, a refinery full of hot surfaces, electrical equipment, vehicles, and flames offered other possibilities. The first blast was followed by fires and additional explosions. Windows broke outside the refinery. Debris crossed the process area. The people closest to the release were turnaround contractors working in and around temporary office trailers. Some trailers had been placed only 121 feet from the blowdown drum. They were light structures inside the potential blast zone of a unit handling large quantities of flammable material. All 15 people killed were in or around those trailers. Workers were injured hundreds of feet away. Trailers as far as 600 feet from the drum were heavily damaged. Placing them there did not cause the tower to overflow. It converted a dangerous release into a mass casualty disaster. And the release itself was not unprecedented. The Chemical Safety Board documented 8 serious incidents involving the same ISOM blowdown system between 1994 and 2004. 2 resulted in fires. 6 released flammable hydrocarbon vapor that could have produced catastrophic explosions if the clouds had found an ignition source. Only 2 of the 8 were investigated as safety incidents. The startup pattern carried another warning. In the 5 years before the explosion, more than 3/4 of raffinate splitter startups pushed the liquid above the instrument's range. In nearly half, it stayed out of range for more than an hour. The March 2005 deviation was greater, but it was not a new kind of behavior. Abnormal had become normal. Each startup that ended safely appeared to confirm that the method worked. Each release that failed to ignite made the open stack seem survivable. The refinery was not learning that the system was safe. It was learning that previous warnings had not yet become a catastrophe. The warnings extended beyond one unit. An internal study in 2002 described serious mechanical integrity and process safety deficiencies. A later analysis linked the refinery's condition directly to reduced maintenance spending and called for major investment. The Chemical Safety Board found that years of cost pressure impaired training, staffing, maintenance, and safety-critical upgrades. The atmospheric blowdown system remained in service even though routing releases to a flare would have burned hydrocarbons more safely. Inside the refinery, people had already described the culture in blunt terms. Production and budgets overshadowed safety. Bad news was not encouraged. Early warning signs could be missed or ignored. Yet one set of numbers looked encouraging. Rates for ordinary workplace injuries were improving. That measured personal safety. Falls, cuts, protective equipment, and the incidents that hurt one worker at a time. It did not measure process safety. Whether a tower could overfill, whether a relief system could contain a major release, or whether occupied trailers sat inside a blast zone. A refinery can improve one and still lose control of the other. At Texas City, the better-looking numbers helped conceal the larger danger. After the explosion, it was possible to arrange the final mistakes into a simple chain. The tower was overfilled. Heat remained on. Product did not leave fast enough. The relief valves opened. The stack overflowed. The vapor found an ignition source. Every statement is true, but a sequence is not the same as a root cause. The CSB reviewed more than 30,000 documents and conducted hundreds of interviews. Its conclusion reached from the ISOM unit into refinery and corporate management. The disaster grew from organizational and safety deficiencies at multiple levels. Ineffective oversight, inadequate resources, weak learning from incidents, unreliable equipment, deficient procedures and training, unmanaged fatigue, obsolete release disposal, and unsafe trailer placement. The operators were the final people touching the system. They were not the people who created all of its conditions. OSHA issued hundreds of citations and penalties exceeding $21 million after the explosion, then pursued further action when hazards remained. The CSB called for stronger refinery inspections, safer trailer siting, fatigue guidance, better process safety measurements, and blowdown systems that did not release flammables into open air. The larger lesson was not a new valve or another checklist. It was a different way of reading warning signs. A day without an injury is not proof that a refinery cannot explode. A startup that survives an overfilled tower is not a successful startup. A vapor release that fails to ignite is not harmless. For years, Texas City produced warnings in forms the organization had learned to tolerate. Broken instruments, abnormal startups, deferred repairs, near misses, and reports describing a site in decline. At 1:20 p.m. on March 23, 2005, those separate warnings became one event. The tower had looked almost empty. The danger around it was already full. If these stories are worth your time, subscribe. There's always another catastrophe.